Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
And good Friday, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snyder with the National Weather Service. It's the 11th of September. As always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your local weather information. You can do that easily today, tonight, or all through the weekend at weather.gov/Alaska. The weather info line is open at 800-472-0391. You can find us at weather.gov/Alaska and on Facebook, on Twitter, and on YouTube. Of course, you know by now, you can almost say it with me, that around 3:45, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, if you go to YouTube, you can get the daily afternoon map briefing that you'll see here, the surface charts that now take you through the weekend from tonight. And of course, you can get information on Twitter and on Facebook. The Twitter feed from Southeast today talking about more rain. Of course, northern parts of Alaska also seeing snow. So watch NWS Fairbanks, NWS Juneau, and NWS Anchorage for more information, kind of the other parts of the story, and it's a story that's happening right now and in between the Alaska weather shows as you go throughout your day and, again, your weekend. Here's a look at the satellite picture, and this is western Alaska here. Here's the Aleutian Chain and the Kamchatka Peninsula and, of course, coasts of Japan and China. As you watch this big swirl of cloud cover lifting northward, remember where it came from. This is now a remnant typhoon, Kilo. This was considerably further south, and there are many other waves of tropical moisture out there. But take a look at this guy. This is tracking northward. It's no longer a typhoon. It's extratropical in nature. And as it continues tracking northward, all that warmth that it's gathered up, all that moisture that it's gathered up and pushed into the atmosphere, a lot of that is still being pumped high into the sky and spreading and fanning out now across the western Bering Sea. So a lot of this is high-level moisture, but some of it isn't. Some of it is just a very large glob of very warm and wet air, and it's traveling northward. What happens when that travels northward into the Arctic where things are pretty cold? Well, the balance of that energy has to be evened out. Mother Nature abhors a vacuum. That's what low pressure is. It gathers up wind, and all that air flows into the vacuum there. And as that air gathers into that low pressure area, it moves up and goes up and comes back down somewhere. Where's that going to go? Well, the whole balance and evening process is happening here across eastern parts of Russia and just south of Petropavlovsk. I'm going to try that again. Petropavlovsk. See, I can't say Russian words. That travels northward, and all of this is going to be balancing out here, but that probably means it's going to displace some cold in the near term, or maybe in the next 7 days or so. So we're going to be watching this pattern change here. Right now, we've still got a very large trough of low pressure in the upper atmosphere that's allowing that colder air to drop southward, allowing a lot of Pacific moisture to move towards southeastern Alaska, and allowing this remnant typhoon now to continue traveling northward again. So that is Kilo, and something we're just keeping an eye on. It's not as powerful as a typhoon anymore, but it certainly is a hefty area of low pressure. Now, the scale on the satellite pictures from the one we just saw to the one over Alaska is a little bit different. So keep that in mind. We're now looking at the Kamchatka Peninsula a little bit closer up to the west, and here are all those clouds streaming off that we just saw on the eastern edge of that remnant typhoon. So watch as that starts building into the western Bering Sea. See what I mean? All that moisture is starting to flow our way. And we have that strong southwesterly flow coming across the Gulf of Alaska. Some pretty hefty moisture there. It looks like, though, the threat for heavier rainfall across southeastern Alaska has diminished somewhat. It's still going to rain along this frontal boundary for the southern third of southeast, but conditions are starting to wane as far as that heavier rainfall potential. In the meantime, we've seen showers and thunderstorms once again across Prince William Sound. We heard of some just outside of Resurrection Bay yesterday, and also across the northern parts of the Gulf. Enough lift there and enough instability in the atmosphere for those rising towers to produce a little bit of hail and probably some lightning again today. Out across the north and west, another round of rainfall being developed by low pressure across the north and western parts of Alaska. And on the north side of this boundary, very close to the Arctic coast, it is cold enough for snow from Wainwright to Barrow to Prudhoe Bay to Kaktovik, and about around to Point Hope and Point Lay. So a lot of cold being gathered up on the north side, but not powerful enough to take over most of Alaska just yet, as that warm and wet air is covering up most of the state and certainly a large chunk of southeastern Alaska at this hour. Here's a look at the surface weather map. There's the snow up north. There have been showers and thunderstorms north of Eagle today, up around Fort Yukon. A 999 millibar low just east of the Alcan border, just to the west. A stronger low pressure center at 989 millibars. And then showers and thunderstorms across the Gulf Coast and parts of Prince William Sound today. Rain and wind over the Kenai Peninsula, Cook Inlet, and certainly Anchorage, the Matanuska and Susitna Bowls getting their fair share, as well as the Kuskokwim Valley, all the way up to the Noatak and Kobuk valleys today. Behind that, drier northerly winds. The winds subsiding enough for the high surf advisories to be dropped around St. Lawrence Island. But in the coming days, we're going to watch the west coast here as west and southwesterly winds will be pushing in. Right now, it looks like the timing of this is not enough to really raise the alarm bells for really strong flooding or coastal flood signals, but it does look like this will be moving in not at high astronomical tide. So the risk for a lot of coastal flooding probably on the lower side, which is really good news, but there may still be some high surf and probably some minor beach erosion there as the waves get higher and the surf gets a little bit stronger than normal. So keep that in mind as we go into tonight, Saturday, and Sunday. Low pressure across south central, still stirring it up tonight. Showers and thunderstorms will be possible across the north and eastern Gulf Coast. A few of those just west of Sitka to points north to Yakutat and outside of Prince William Sound. There are going to be some pockets of snow up around the Brooks Range. Most areas along the Arctic coast will still be looking at rain and snow showers together as we head through the nighttime hours. Showers continue in southwestern Alaska. And you see how the pressure gradient's tightening up right here? Those lines, those black lines, are lines of constant pressure, or isobars. And the tighter they get, the faster the wind's going to flow. In Alaska, they tend to follow these lines pretty well, so the wind would be coming in more from the west across southwestern Alaska and into Norton Sound. And that's probably where the wind would be the strongest. So as we get into Saturday and as we get into Sunday, as you'll see here in a minute, the winds will be a little bit noticeable across south and western Alaska. Low pressure across the Chukchi Seacoast at 1,009 millibars will keep cold enough air situated very close to Point Barrow and Wainwright and into Kotzebue Sound. There could be rain and snow showers for you throughout the day. Showers and thunderstorms will spread into the western parts of Yukon there, and rainfall will still be possible across a large part of the Copper River Basin and the eastern interior, as well as Fairbanks, looking a little more showery through the day. And Saturday also looking for a developing chance of rain across south central, including Anchorage, Matanuska, and the Susitna Valleys. For southeast, rain is still on order there with low pressure working across the Gulf, but high pressure is starting to slow things down for Adak, Atka, and Unalaska and Dutch Harbor, as well as a large part of the Alaska Peninsula. Don't be surprised to catch a few showers there, especially on the windward side. Keep your eye out across the western Bering Sea. Remember, we were talking about that remnant typhoon. Well, here comes the surface part of that storm system, and no longer a typhoon, but a low pressure system nonetheless, and one that's gathered up a lot of moisture. As that moves out across the western Bering Sea, it drops to about 994 millibars. Still not terribly impressive, but it is going to have enough cold air behind it that it's going to grab a little bit of the wind and move that fairly quickly into west and southwestern Alaska. This is Sunday, and it will have rain, and it will probably have some gusty winds, and probably looking at some onshore flow there across the Bering. A pretty decent fetch developing there. So again, we're going to watch for probably stronger winds, probably some higher and stronger surf, and enough so that we might see some beach erosion in some areas. So high surf advisories could be possible. We'll wait and see what happens as we get closer to time. But as far as large-scale coastal flooding, right now the concern hasn't quite reached that point. So make sure you're paying attention to the weather if you're on the west coast, southwestern Alaska, Bristol Bay, up toward Norton Sound, and Kuskokwim Bay, out toward Nunivak Island and Newtok, and out toward Norton Sound. You want to keep an eye on the weather as we go ahead into the weekend. But again, for right now, it's not hitting at the worst time where the high astronomical tide is occurring. So very good news there. Showers continue in southeastern Alaska. Looks like clouds for a large part of the Copper River Basin for Sunday up and down the Alcan. And there's still a pesky low up there just north of Kaktovik at 1,011 millibars with a chance for rain and snow showers there. Some drier air will be reaching closer to the Chukchi Seacoast as we get into Sunday, but freezing spray becoming more of a predominant feature there in your marine weather We'll talk about that as we get into the back half of the show. Meanwhile, high pressure is moving eastward into the Gulf of Alaska at 1,032 millibars. Some slightly drier air moving in with that, at least briefly, as we get into Sunday afternoon. Again, warmer air also heading for southwestern Alaska by the end of the weekend. Speaking of warm air, temps in the upper 50s and lower 60s were found across southern parts of southeast earlier today. 57 in Sitka, 59 in the capital city, 57 for Yakutat. Mid 40s around Prince William Sound, Cordova, and Valdez, and Portage included. 52 for Seward, 54 in Kenai. Even warmer out in Homer today, 50 for Anchorage, and mid 50s around Talkeetna. 53 in Healy, 58 in Fort Greely, with Gulkana showing 48 this afternoon, almost 10 degrees warmer in Fairbanks, 48 in Fort Yukon, 54 in Eagle. It was 36 in Kaktovik today, hovering very close to the freezing point, maybe just a little bit above it for many of the villages across the North Slope today. 34 in Wainwright, 39 in Kivalina, 40 in Kotzebue. A cool day in Shishmaref at 36. Nice to see you all back on the map. 41 in Nome today, with Unalakleet showing 42. Galena was 44. Ambler had 36 this afternoon, with Tanana at 52. McGrath mid-40s, about the same there in Bethel. Nunivak Island was 45. St. Lawrence Island 43, with winds dropping off. Lower to mid-50s around Bristol Bay. Lake Iliamna had 52. Even warmer as you get into southern parts of Kodiak Island. 63 in Kodiak itself, and low to mid-50s for most of the Alaska Peninsula, with Sandpoint at 55. Dutch Harbor in Alaska showed 48, about the same as St. George today, and lower 50s for the western and central chain this afternoon. Overnight low temperatures will stay cool up across the North Slope. Many villages dropping just south of that 32-degree mark. 32 around Nome overnight, 36 in Unalakleet. Looks like Galena will be in the mid-30s. Most of the middle Tanana Valley will stay above freezing. Fairbanks looking at temps in the upper 30s to low 40s. South Central back in the mid to upper 40s tonight. Southeast closer to 50 degrees. The Alaska Peninsula in the upper 40s. Kodiak also looking at about 49. High temperatures tomorrow will stay fairly close to the 50-degree mark around Fairbanks in the middle Tanana Valley. Mid-50s for South Central, about the same in Southeast, a little bit warmer around Ketchikan, Craig, Klawock, and Annette. 56 for Kodiak, mid-50s for the Alaska Peninsula. St. Paul, you're looking at 51. St. Lawrence Island, 48, about 45 in Nome. And Barrow expecting a high of about 36, with Prudhoe Bay and Dead Horse just a little bit warmer than that. Flying weather includes a wide area of MVFR across the northern Gulf as low pressure continues to gather up rainfall and showers and thunderstorms throughout the day. Some of that also reaching up and down the Alcan. Watch for a better chance of IFR conditions from Point Barrow and maybe Wainwright eastward toward Prudhoe Bay and Dead Horse. Just inside of the coastal areas of Norton Sound, expect an opportunity for IFR through the afternoon, and also across the western Bering where moisture and rain and wind is gathering there. Past conditions include MVFR for Anaktuvik by the end of the day. We expect improvements for Adigan Pass as well for your Saturday. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass, we expect to see VFR conditions throughout the afternoon, but you'll probably start at MVFR. MVFR conditions for Rainy Pass, also looking for improvements there during your Saturday. Windy Pass may not see those improvements, hovering around marginal conditions through most of the day. Isabel Pass, we expect to see MVFR. Mentasta Pass, watching for an opportunity for convection. Showers and thunderstorms possible there. Otherwise, VFR in the afternoon, so watch for those towering clouds. Tanita Pass, MVFR conditions are expected throughout most of your Saturday. Portage Pass, we do expect to improve through Saturday, but starting out at IFR. And Chilkoot and White Pass, we expect to see marginal conditions through a large part of the day. The freezing levels still show the same tale as yesterday. We have the trough of low pressure in the upper atmosphere. That's allowing that big cold to drop down the west coast. But you can see the big warm out across the west. Levels there as high as 10,000 feet out toward Attu. And for southeastern Alaska, levels as high as 6 to about 10,000 feet. For most of southeastern Alaska, probably looking at 6 to 8,000 feet. Most of the northwestern interior down below 2,000 feet. You can see over south central and the eastern interior, those levels climb to as high as 6,000 feet for areas just north of the Copper River Basin. So icing potential, it's kind of hit and miss. Out across the west, you still have to climb pretty high up there to find decent opportunities for widespread icing. Above 9,000 feet there for light icing potential. And across the North Slope, that's going to be a little lower, above 4,000 feet and above 9,000 feet for northern parts of Southeast and Prince William Sound, and then considerably higher out across the western Bering, of course. The jet stream shows that strong northwesterly flow coming across the Bering Strait and diving towards southwestern Alaska. That's the cold, that's the power that's moving the remnant typhoon moisture into the Bering Sea, but we still have that strong push in from the south and west that's pushing winds up to 150 knots just south and west of southeastern Alaska. That's where all the rain has come from. So that pattern's still there, and we still have that predominant upper level weather pattern that's going to keep the surface weather kind of the same. 9,000 feet, we see those developing westerlies coming across the Bering. That's going to push the weather fairly quickly into western Alaska. Those wind speeds 25 to 50 knots. Winds also traveling west-east across the Gulf. A little bit more of a southwesterly flow for the interior at 20 to 25 knots. And winds coming off the continent from the south and east over Point Barrow around 15 knots or so. A pretty similar pattern at 3,000 feet. A predominant westerly wind up to 50 knots across the Bering and the Aleutians, slowing down as it moves over the Gulf of Alaska, and light winds across the interior about 10 to 30 knots there at the 3,000 foot level, as well as southeast moving in from the south and west at 20 knots there for your daytime tomorrow. So what about turbulence? The main focus really should be the Arctic coast below 4,000 feet. You'll probably see some chop from Point Barrow all the way toward Kaktovik and Demarcation Point. Watch for increasing areas of occasional moderate around Norton Sound below 4,000 feet there. Probably going to start to see more areas with some chop, especially around the southwestern coast as we get into Sunday, and watching for kind of a gap flow with the stronger winds moving over the Barren Islands between Kodiak Island and Homer there below 4,000 feet, and developing areas of turbulence thanks to wind speeds increasing out across Attu below 6,000 feet as you go through your Saturday. That's a look at your aviation forecast. I'll be back with your marine weather here in just a few minutes. Stay tuned.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Mary O'Connor with the Alaskan Aviation Safety Foundation and the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health here in Anchorage. On behalf of Alaska Public Media, thank you for watching Hangar Flying. This evening, we are happy to have as our guest Bart Stone. Bart started his aviation career 50-plus years ago and has commercial airplane, helicopter, and glider certificates, a flight instructor certificate, and he is comfortable flying on wheels, floats, or skis. He's an experienced professional pilot. He was the chief pilot at the Office of Aviation Services with the Department of the Interior and is now working for a commercial operator in Alaska. Welcome to Hangar Flying, Bart.
Thank you for the invite.
As you know, August is a challenging month for aviation safety, and with an increase in flying activities from air tours, fishing, and hunting activities, it makes it challenging for pilots. Are there seasonal changes with the weather that pilots should be aware of?
Well, yes, and what happens right now at this time of year, here we're coming up on hunting season, and everybody's getting their airplanes out. They're going to be going out to their favorite camps, favorite airstrips, but now the weather's changing. We've had a great summer, but now if people are paying attention to the weather, we're getting low fog in the early morning persisting throughout the day, and weather conditions change. So a lot of things I look at as people bring up, you know, they just check the weather cams and then they go, or they're going into areas where there's no weather reporting. Weather cams are great, but they only report what's the weather is right now, not in 3 hours when you get there.
So flight planning is different for commercial pilots who have strict regulations and operation specifications that they have to follow. What can general aviation pilots do to get good weather information?
Well, you know, even in our flying commercially, a lot of things what we do is, you know, we check the weather every day, and one of the things we do is check it through something like Duets. So you have a track that you actually check the weather each day. But in addition to that, oftentimes we call the lodges, we call local pilots that have been flying in those lodges, we call the competitors, and we say, have you guys had any flights out that way today? So we look for a lot of resources, and the competitors, we share our information left and right just to make it generally a safer operation for everybody. So it behooves anybody to use all their resources that are available and call the lodges, see what's going on, see what the local weather is out there, and just don't trust what you see on the weather cams. You have to dig into it a little bit deeper, especially this time of year.
That's some great advice. Do you have any rules of thumb or advice that you gave out when you were responsible for training pilots?
Yeah, you've got to always have, if you're going to be flying like we are now going into changing season, you always want to have an out. And when you're flying, you have to set your personal limits and not go below those personal limits. What you need to do is you're flying along, always be situationally aware of what's going on around you. And what I saw a lot of, and what I've seen sometimes now recently, is a lot of people depend upon GPSs to get them from one point to another, and they're not looking outside at the weather. All they are is just looking to where they're going and being on a course and a track to there. But you need to be looking ahead of you, and you need to be looking behind you, because the weather can turn in behind you. And so I always have an out. I always have a mind set that 10 minutes back there's a lake, there's a field, something I can put this airplane down, and every once in a while you're going to need that. So you need all the tools you can to help yourself make a safe flight, and one of them is just being aware of where you can go if the weather turns suddenly bad. And one of the things I really like was the Medallion Foundation, where they could turn the weather down on you, and you have to make a decision flying those simulators on what you're going to do.
So you advocate spending time in a simulator and...
Absolutely, you know, because it's realistic enough that when they start lowering the weather, you have to make a decision. And oftentimes you'll see, if you haven't been looking forward and you haven't been looking backwards, that when you do turn around and do a 180, there's no alternatives. And then you're in the trees.
Thank you, Bart. We appreciate your time and your willingness to share your experience and knowledge. We're going to look forward to having you back on our show, and we're going to talk a little bit about situational awareness next time.
Okay.
So thank you.
Yeah, we could do that.
Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be back next time with Bart Stone to learn some more information about flying safely. We hope that you have learned something, and we hope you've enjoyed hangar flying. Until next time, fly safely.
Something interesting happened in the last couple days up around Barrow. Our Weather Service office there went out and measured the sea surface temperature, as they do just about every day. And they noticed the temperature was about, I think, 4 degrees. And then yesterday it cooled down a little bit more. And then today it was 0.6 degrees Celsius. So a big change in the temperature right there. And you can see how much colder the water is across the eastern Beaufort Seacoast. Well, not the case around the Chukchi Seacoast, but a sign that some things are probably changing. Here's the sea ice edge, and you can see some multi-year and first-year ice. So well offshore, there's still lingering ice there between Prudhoe Bay and Kaktovik, right up against the shoreline, though. Anytime you want to check out the ice edge for yourself, you can do that by going to weather.gov/anchorage/ice.php. Here's a look at the weather now for southeastern Alaska. South and westerly winds still coming ashore at 15 to 20 knots around the outer coast. The inner coast looking at 15 to 20 knot winds with 2 to 4 foot seas. The higher seas, of course, up around the Lynn Canal as we get into Saturday. By Sunday, still holding on to 20 knot winds from the south. A little bit slower as you head further southward into the Clarence Strait. Northwesterlies at 15 knots with 3 foot seas, and northwesterlies develop across the outer coast anywhere from 10 to 25 knots at their highest, with 8 foot seas expected for Sunday. For south central, light winds inside of Prince William Sound, a 10-knot wind there from the south and east, 2 foot seas expected there and across northern parts of Cook Inlet. Otherwise, stronger westerlies blowing right over the Barrens, 35 to 40 knots with 10 foot seas expected. Westerlies also just east of Kodiak at 30 knots with a 9 foot sea. Those diminished to 25 knots by Sunday. Southwesterlies coming through Shelikof Strait and up Cook Inlet, 15 to 25 knots at their strongest with 5 foot seas inside of Shelikof, 2 foot seas in the northern parts of Cook Inlet, and a light and variable flow inside of Prince William Sound, and westerlies blowing across the north and western parts of the Gulf with 6 to 8 foot seas there on Sunday. North and westerly winds continue for the Alaska Peninsula on either side, about 6 to 9 foot seas. The higher seas between Chignik and Castle Cape there at 25 knots. Sunday, look for more of a southwesterly shift with 30 knots on the Bering Sea coast, 8 to 10 foot seas there, and 6 foot seas continue for the Pacific coastline with 20 to 25 knot winds from the west and southwest. For the Aleutians, a southwesterly flow continues with winds 20 to 30 knots in the west with 6 to 9 foot seas there, 6 foot seas from Adak eastward on Alaska, and 5 to 6 foot seas with more of a light and variable flow across the Pacific coast for Saturday. That changes a little bit on Sunday with stronger southwesterlies developing and feeding into that faster flow even further north Look for 30 to 35 knots in the west with 11 to 13 foot seas, 10 to 12 foot seas across the Bering Sea coast, and 6 to 7 foot seas across the Pacific coast as we finish out the weekend. For the west coast, watch this carefully now. South and westerly winds coming in around 25 knots for Saturday. This is Saturday, and remember, we're going to watch for that stronger westerly push here. Look for a 7 to 8 foot seas in most areas as we get into Saturday. Seas around 6 to 8 feet on either side of Nunivak Island from Kuskokwim Bay and into Norton Sound. As we get into Sunday, we get that stronger south and westerly flow developing. And that means 15-foot seas. They're coming into Kuskokwim Bay on a 40-knot wind. 40-knot winds for the Pribilovs with an 18-foot sea and 13 to 15-foot seas from Nunivak Island and Hooper Bay west toward the St. Matthew Island waters. Again, this should give a pretty decent fetch moving in from west to east. So again, if you're on the west coast in southwestern Alaska, keep an eye on the weather this week. And if you have damage or are seeing conditions change, give us a call and let us know what you're seeing and report any damage, please. Here's a look at Saturday, and across the North Slope, look for easterlies coming across the Beaufort Seacoast. 30-knot winds in those areas with 10-foot seas, also 30 knots north of Point Barrow. Freezing spray is going to be an issue from the Beaufort Seacoast and just west of Wainwright as we get into Saturday. As we get into Sunday, look for westerlies coming from Prudhoe Bay to Kaktovik, 25 to 30 knots, and freezing spray is an issue there. 10 to 15-knot winds around the Chukchi Seacoast, 3 to 4-foot seas expected in those areas. Let's recap our surface weather again quickly. Showers and thunderstorms are possible across the north and eastern Gulf Coast as we head into tonight. Cooler air is slowly moving eastward, bringing out more rainfall, and more will redevelop across south central for tomorrow. Heavier rainfall is pretty much winding down for southeast. It will still be a wet weekend for you, but the risk for heavier rainfall is ending. Showers of rain and snow across the North Slope should be expected, as well as rainfall for south and western Alaska. And a powerful wave of westerlies will move across the Bering Sea as we get into Sunday. Watch for that to push water up onto the shore, but flood advisories are not posted at this time. Thanks for watching, Alaska.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.